There we go. Good morning, everybody. Justin Dunaway here with the Institute of Clinical Excellence. And on this Clinical Tuesday, I want to bring you today's episode called You Are Contagious. But I'm not talking about disease pathology, infectious diseases, a lot of the contagious stuff that we're talking about currently. What I really want to talk about today is social and emotional contagion theory and how we can use this in practice. This is kind of a rabbit hole I jumped down recently. I heard the term in a book I was reading and then just started reading some research and saw some really interesting stuff. But it started with this study I read out of New Zealand a handful of years ago called Is Depression Contagious? The Importance of Social Networks and the Implication of Contagion Theory. It was basically a review that looked at a bunch of different studies that examined some of the data from the Framingham Heart Study data set. And you'll see this data in a lot of spots. It's this massive epidemiological study where they measured a whole bunch of stuff in a massive amount of humans and tracked them for like 60, 70 years. So you'll see lots of different studies using this data set. But what this article is talking about, they looked at loneliness, depression, and happiness, and they looked at clusters of those things in the population and how they spread over time. And what they found first was that it was really interesting that when you looked at the population as a whole, those traits tend to cluster together and those clusters kind of grew over time. But what was really interesting is what they found is that it wasn't that depressed people hung out with depressed people and lonely people hung out with lonely people and happy people sought out and hung out with happy people. What they actually found is that the emotional states of a person would transfer to other people. And then that emotional state in those people would transfer to others and it would spread. Long story short here, what they're saying is what the data set showed is that my depression, my loneliness, my happiness, whatever we're looking at, my loneliness, I come into contact with you, and through that interaction, you get a sense of loneliness. You become more lonely. And then when you go out in the population, the next person that you encounter, you actually make them a little bit more lonely. And then they go out and do the same thing. And what they found in the study is not only does our emotional state transfer to the people that we're in contact with, but that emotional state has the ability to transfer up to 3 degrees of separation. My depression is going to pass to you, and then you're going to pass that to one person, and then that person is going to pass it to one more person. So we can see how this has massive implications, and it can spread through a population. So it brings us to what we're really talking about here. Emotional contagion, social contagion, contagion theory basically says that emotional states behave like infectious diseases. And they have very similar mathematical spreading patterns through a population, but emotions behave like an infectious disease, and they spread through groups of people that interact with each other and out into populations. And this is absolutely fascinating stuff. And it kind of works like this. It's from a physiologic and behavioral standpoint, humans are hardwired to mimic the emotions and behaviors of the people and things they come in contact with. And from a conscious standpoint, we tend to mimic facial expressions, vocal patterns, postures, gait, just how humans move. When we watch another person move, we kind of mimic right into that. The other thing that we do is we have subconscious mimicry, and this is through some different neurophysiologic things. This is through things called mirror neurons, but basically the kind of the emotional state of brain activity that you're in, my brain will match that as we interact. Absolutely fascinating stuff and some complicated science. So where I kind of went next as I was diving down this rabbit hole, I was looking at, there was a bunch of research that came up on social contagion, emotional contagion in a teaching environment, right? And what they found is that, if you look at a group of students, if you have a classroom that has students that are very engaged and enthusiastic, that emotion spreads through the classroom. And vice versa, if you have students that are unengaged or not interested in the material, that emotion, that emotional state spreads through the classroom as well. But where it got really interesting is when we started looking at the contagion effect of teachers onto the classroom. And then this is kind of a no-brainer, but there's a lot of cool science behind it, is that teachers who are more enthusiastic, that are more engaged with their material, that really genuinely seem to love the thing they're talking about, they elicit that emotion in their students, and the students are also significantly more engaged in the material, and they tend to have a more emotional connection to that material. Not because the instructor is interesting, but because we kind of absorb that emotion. If I love the thing I'm talking about, you just are hardwired to love it as well. Now, where it gets really fascinating is this last study I read. They looked at, so we know that people, so we look at cortisol, the stress hormone. It has a normal circadian rhythm. It's high in the morning, it peaks, it lowers throughout the day, and it's low at night. People with chronic stress, people with post-traumatic stress disorder, people with depression, people with sleep dysfunction, people in pain, that curve is blunted. And we can measure that. You can do a salivary sample and measure morning cortisol levels, and you can kind of tell how blunted that curve is. What they found is if you measure a bunch of students and you measure their resting morning cortisol level, students that have low morning cortisol, which means a blunted cortisol effect, correlate with teachers, with faculty that report high levels of burnout. If I believe that I'm burned out as an instructor, it affects the stress of my students in a powerful neurophysiologic way. That anxiety, that stress, that depression, whatever that negative emotion I'm feeling is subconsciously and physiologically transferred to the people I'm engaging in a way that affects their physiology. Team, this stuff is absolutely fascinating. So how do we use it? Well, we've used it for a long time, and we think about it a lot in clinical practice. Empathy is a form of emotional contagion, right? It's just in the other direction, right? So we're trained as clinicians to be really in tune with empathy. We really think about trying to empathize with our patient. They come in the door, we recognize their emotional state, and we try to put ourselves in those shoes so we can feel that emotional state, so we can connect with the patients. And that's very important. I'm not saying we ditch that. That's how we should do every session as the patient walks in the door. But what I'm advocating for is empathy in reverse. It's flipping the script. As well as engaging our patients with empathy. Once we get to that state, once we understand our patient, we can connect with them and feel what they're feeling. We've got to flip the script. We've got to try to engage empathy in our patients. Remember, we're hardwired. We're hardwired to match the emotion in the room or the feeling in the room. So we can think about it like a tug of war, right? If there's two competing emotions in the room, I'm depressed and lonely, you're excited, having fun, happy, warm, and engaged. Through our interaction, one of us is going to shift. You're either going to come closer to my side of the line, or I'm going to come closer to your side of the line. The goal of empathy is for me to move closer to your side, me to move into your loneliness, your depression, your anxiety, so I can feel it, understand it, and create the program to help you change that. But before that interaction is over, I got to pull again. I got to bring you back to my side. I have to embody the emotion that I want you to walk out of the clinic with. I can talk to you about happiness. I can talk to you about changing anxiety. I can talk to you about all these things. But if I really want to shift your emotional state, you are hardwired to match it. So I've got to win the tug of war. So when I think about this, I kind of think about this three ways. I think about this in teaching, I think about this in the clinic, and I think about this in kind of general behavior stuff. You know, from a teaching perspective, and we do a lot of teaching in the clinic, we do a lot of teaching in the classroom, it's good to understand this stuff. But from a teaching perspective, I need to love my material. I need to be enthusiastic about my material. I need to be engaged with it. I need to be curious about my material and curious about my students. If my students perceive that excitement, that enthusiasm, that love for the material in them, if they perceive my curiosity about the topic and my curiosity about them, they'll match that. They'll engage the material with the same emotions and the same curiosity. And that's how you instill learning in a very powerful way. In the clinic, we know that happiness, we know that warmth, we know that optimism, we know that self-efficacy are things that drive outcomes. So I'm going to start by trying to match your emotion so I can understand where you're at. But then I've got to shift to those things. I have to be happy. I have to be engaging. I have to be warm. I have to exude self-efficacy. I have to show investment in my own personal health. I have to show all of these things in a way that you subconsciously pick up on them. So I can start to win that tug of war. So I can start to shift you into that direction. From a behavior change perspective, these are things that we preach all the time at ICE, the be about it. You know, if you look at all of our courses, if you look at a lot of these podcasts, if you look at a lot of stuff that all the faculty believe in, we believe that we need to embody the behavior change we want to see out in the world. We have to be fit. We have to exercise. We have to believe in that. We have to have good mental health practices, good sleep hygiene, good diet. And we have to show that, not just educate it, because if this is truly what we do, from a social contagion theory, that's going to spread out into the populace. At South, we do the same stuff. We have this program called the MEDS program, where we talk about meds as in mindfulness, exercise, diet, and sleep as kind of the pillars of good health. And we want to, as faculty, we try to demonstrate that to students so that behavior change shifts into the students. And then that behavior change, when the students embody it and they go out into the clinic, it's infectious. It bleeds out into the communities as well. So the bottom line is this. When we think about empathy, it's awesome. It's important. We need to be able to gauge that, but realize that all humans, not just clinicians, are hardwired for empathy. So we need to think about empathy in reverse. We need to think about the tug of war. We need to think about entering any interaction with the intention of shifting mood and behavior in a positive direction. Understand at the end of the day that we are all contagious, very contagious, up to 3 degrees of separation. And as clinicians and as educators, we are in contact with so many humans. We're very, very infectious. We're super spreaders. Let's be very intentional about what we spread. Step into every interaction we can, trying to exude the emotion we're trying to get. Warmth, happiness, curiosity, engagement, excitement, positive behaviors, whatever it is we're after, realize that if we embody that, it's going to spread to the patients. And that spread is super important, because what the Framingham study told us is that that's going to spread up to 3 degrees. That patient's going to go out into the world and spread that as well. We are all contagious. Be very intentional about what it is that we spread. Awesome, team. Thanks for hanging out. That's what I got for today. Have an awesome day in the clinic. Realize you're contagious and go out and spread the good stuff.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to the PT on Ice Daily Show. If you enjoyed this content, head on over to iTunes and leave us a review. And be sure to check us out on Facebook and Instagram at the Institute of Clinical Excellence. If you're interested in getting plugged into more ICE content on a weekly basis while earning CEUs from home, check out our virtual ICE online mentorship program at ptonice.com. While you're there, sign up for our Hump Day Hustling newsletter for a free email every Wednesday morning with our top 5 research articles and social media posts that we think are worth reading. Head over to ptonice.com and scroll to the bottom of the page to sign up.